When I finally closed on my dream home in Oakwood Estates, I thought I was leaving the high-pressure world of litigation behind, at least when I walked through my front door. After 15 years of corporate law, battling Fortune 500 companies, and living on coffee and adrenaline, I was ready for a slice of suburban tranquility. The neighborhood seemed perfect. Manicured lawns, a community pool, walking trails, and most importantly, distance from the downtown chaos where my law firm operated. What I didn't realize was that I had just traded corporate warfare for a different kind of battle, one with an adversary more relentless than any opposing counsel I'd ever faced. My moving day started smoothly enough. The truck arrived precisely at 8 a.m., and my years of organizational skills meant everything was labeled, boxed, and ready for an efficient transition. I stood in the driveway, coffee in hand, directing the movers with the same precision I used in the courtroom. The sectional goes in the living room. Artwork needs to be handled with special care, and please make sure the home office furniture is set up exactly according to the diagram. I was so focused on the logistics that I didn't immediately notice the woman marching toward my property, clipboard clutched to her chest like a medieval shield, her face set in what I would soon learn was a perpetual expression of disapproval. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Moving activities are only permitted between the hours of 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. on weekdays." I checked my watch, 8:17 a.m., and turned to face her with my well-practiced professional smile. "Good morning, I'm Michael Chen, just moving in." I extended my hand, which she pointedly ignored. "I'm Patricia Winters, HOA Compliance Committee Chair," she said, already scribbling something on her clipboard. "And you're in violation of Neighborhood Covenant Section 12.3. I maintained my composure, despite the absurdity of being reprimanded. Within my first hour of home ownership. "I apologize, I wasn't aware of that restriction. The previous owner didn't mention—" "Ignorance of the rules is not an excuse," she interrupted, her pen scratching furiously against the paper. "The moving truck is also partially blocking the sidewalk, which is a violation of Section 8.5, and that temporary storage pod in your driveway. It needs to be removed by sundown, or you'll incur a daily fine of $75. I glanced at the pod, which contained my more fragile possessions that needed special attention. "I understand, but the pod company can't pick it up until tomorrow morning. I specifically arranged—" "Not my problem," Patricia cut in again, tearing off a pink slip from her clipboard and thrusting it toward me. "Here's your first notice. If these issues aren't resolved immediately, a formal complaint will be filed with the HOA board." As she spoke, I noticed her taking photos of my property, the moving truck, and even my personal vehicle with her phone. Something about her methodical documentation seemed excessive, even to me, and I was someone who documented everything in my professional life. "I'll do what I can," I said, taking the notice and maintaining my diplomatic tone. Over Patricia's shoulder, I noticed my next-door neighbor in his yard giving me a sympathetic look and a subtle headshake. Patricia narrowed her eyes, scanning my property once more. "Your mailbox is 2 inches taller than regulation height. You'll need to fix that by the end of the week." With that, she pivoted on her heel and marched toward the neighbor's house, no doubt to find their infractions as well. I sighed, tucking the notice into my pocket and returning to direct the movers. So much for suburban tranquility. Later that afternoon, as I unpacked my home office, the doorbell rang. It was my next-door neighbor, holding a bottle of wine and wearing a friendly smile. "Welcome to the neighborhood." "I'm David," he said, handing me the bottle. "Thought you might need this after your introduction to the Patricia experience." I invited him in, grateful for the friendly face. "Is she always like that?" David laughed without humor. "Oh, that was just her getting started. Patricia, we all call her HOA Karen behind her back, has made it her life's mission to control every square inch of this community. She's forced 3 families to move out in the past year alone." "For what?" I asked, opening the wine. "Minor infractions, mostly made up. She targets newcomers especially, gets the HOA to levy fines until people either conform to her vision of paradise or leave." David took a sip of his wine. "What do you do for a living anyway?" "I'm an attorney. Corporate litigation, primarily, though I handle some real estate and contract law as well." David nearly choked on his wine. "You're a lawyer, And Patricia's already on your case? He let out a genuine laugh this time. Oh, this is going to be interesting. As we chatted, I learned more about Patricia's reign of terror over Oakwood Estates. How she'd manipulated her way onto the HOA board. How she selectively enforced rules against people she didn't like. How she'd turned what should have been a friendly community into a neighborhood of anxious homeowners, constantly checking their mailboxes for violation notices. After David left, I was unpacking kitchen boxes when I noticed something slipped under my front door. It was an official HOA warning letter, printed on heavy cardstock with the association's logo embossed at the top. "Dear new resident," it began. "This notice serves as formal documentation of multiple violations observed during your move-in process today." The letter listed 6 separate infractions, each with corresponding fines that would be assessed, if not remedied, within 48 hours. At the bottom was Patricia's signature, with HOA compliance chair printed beneath it. I set the letter down on a settee. My kitchen counter, a familiar sensation spreading through my chest, that same focused energy I felt before taking on a challenging case. I had moved to Oakwood Estate seeking peace, but it seemed Patricia Winters had other plans. What she didn't know was that I had spent my entire career handling people exactly like her, people who used rules as weapons, who thrived on intimidation, who mistook bureaucratic authority for actual power. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the warning letter, creating a new folder titled Patricia Winters. Then I poured myself another glass of wine, sat down at my newly assembled desk, and began reading through the Oakwood Estates HOA covenant line by line. If Patricia wanted a war, I would make sure she had no idea who she was up against. During my first week at Oakwood Estates, I tried to focus on settling in while maintaining a diplomatic approach with Patricia. Years of handling difficult opponents had taught me to choose my battles wisely. I unpacked my belongings, arranged my home office with the same precision I applied to case preparations, and took time to explore my new neighborhood. The community itself was everything I had hoped for. Well-maintained walking paths, a pristine pool area, and neighbors who, with the notable exception of Patricia, seemed genuinely welcoming. Several stopped by with housewarming gifts and invitations to weekend barbecues. I began to think that perhaps I could navigate around the HOA Karen problem with minimal conflict. That illusion shattered on my 5th morning in the neighborhood. I was in my kitchen brewing coffee when I noticed Patricia standing at the edge of my property, measuring tape in hand, meticulously documenting something about my mailbox. She didn't even try to be subtle, taking multiple photos from different angles, occasionally shaking her head in obvious disapproval. When I stepped outside to retrieve my newspaper, she pounced. "Mr. Chen, your mailbox is exactly 2.25 inches above the maximum height stipulated in the HOA Guidelines Section 4.7.2, she announced, holding up her measuring tape like evidence in a trial. "And the post is painted off-white, when the approved color is summer cloud." I sipped my coffee, buying time to maintain my composure. "Good morning to you too, Patricia. I appreciate your thoroughness, but the mailbox came with the house. The previous owner had it installed." "That's irrelevant," she said, already writing up a violation notice. "New ownership means ensuring all aspects of the property are in compliance. You have 7 days to correct this issue, or face a $50 fine followed by $25 daily penalties." I took the notice from her, noting it was already the 3rd one I'd received since moving in. "I'll look into it," I said neutrally. Patricia wasn't. "Finished? Also, your garbage bin was placed 14 inches from the curb yesterday. Section 9.3 clearly states bins must be precisely 12 inches from the curb, no more, no less." She handed me another pink slip. "That's a $35 violation." As she walked away, I noticed David working in his garden next door. He shook his head sympathetically. "Want to know the most absurd part?" he called over once Patricia was out of earshot. "She measures everyone's garbage bins with that tape measure every single week, but somehow, only people she doesn't like get citations." "Selective enforcement," I murmured, the attorney in me immediately recognizing a legal vulnerability in her approach. I filed that observation away for later. Back inside, I added the new violation notices to my growing Patricia Winters folder and made a few notes about her measuring techniques and documentation methods. Something about her obsessive approach struck me as more than just overzealous rule enforcement. There was a calculation to it that raised my professional suspicions. The next day, I woke early to catch up on some case files I'd brought home. Around 9 a.m., the doorbell rang. A delivery man stood outside with a beautiful arrangement of potted flowers for my front porch, a gift from my law partners congratulating me on the new home. I thanked him, arranged the colorful display near my front door, and returned to work. Not 3 hours later, another notice appeared under my door. Violation. Unapproved botanical specimens on front. Entryway. Section 17.4 requires all visible plants to be from the approved vegetation list. Fine, $70. I stared at the notice in disbelief before pulling up the HOA guidelines on my laptop. Sure enough, buried in the 94-page document was a list of approved vegetation for front-facing areas. My colorful arrangement, featuring several tropical varieties, was indeed in violation. Rather than fight this battle, I decided to comply, moving the plants to my backyard patio and ordering new ones from the approved list. A small concession to maintain peace, I told myself, but Patricia was just getting started. Over the next few weeks, the violations multiplied. My sprinkler schedule was watering my lawn 7 minutes longer than permitted time frames. The brass numbers on my house were 0.5 inches larger than regulation size. My porch light was 5 lumens brighter than allowed after sunset. The mulch in my flower beds was russet brown instead of autumn chestnut. Each violation came with increasingly hefty fines. By the end of the month, I had allegedly accumulated over $800 in penalties. I hadn't paid any of them yet, carefully documenting each notice while researching HOA law in my spare time. What truly raised my concern was when I began receiving complaints about excessive visitor traffic to my home. As an attorney, I occasionally had clients visit my home office for document signings or brief consultations when downtown meetings weren't possible. These visits were infrequent, perhaps 1 or 2 per week, and never disruptive. Yet according to the violations, I was operating a high-volume commercial enterprise in a residential zone. One evening, as I was reviewing case notes on my patio, my phone chimed with a text from David. "Look at the silver Lexus parked across the street." I glanced up discreetly to see Patricia sitting in her car, camera with telephoto lens pointed directly at my house. When a client arrived for a brief document signing, Patricia documented the entire interaction, from arrival to departure. This crossed a line from annoying to concerning. I texted back, "How long has she been doing this?" David's response was immediate. "She started surveillance on the Harrison family 3 months before they moved out. Same pattern." The next morning, I decided to review the HOA covenant regarding home businesses. As I suspected, Section 23.1 clearly stated, "Home offices are permitted for residents when such usage does not create excessive noise, traffic, or visible commercial activity." My occasional client visits clearly fell within these guidelines. Yet the violations continued to accumulate, each one documented with Patricia's meticulous photographs and timestamps. 3 days later, things escalated further when I received an official letter, not just a violation notice, from the HOA board. "Dear Mr. Chen, it has come to the board's attention that you are operating a commercial business from your residence in violation of the Oakwood Estates Covenant. Multiple documented instances of business visitors, commercial vehicles, and extended business activity have been submitted by the Compliance Committee. You are hereby ordered to cease all business operations within your home immediately. Failure to comply will result in formal legal action by the association. A special hearing has been scheduled for Thursday at 7 p.m. in the community clubhouse to address these ongoing violations and accumulated fines totaling $1,275. Sincerely, the Oakwood Estates HOA Board." I set the letter down, feeling a familiar tension in my jaw, the same tension I felt before a challenging court case. This had moved beyond petty harassment into something more coordinated. The timing, documentation, and escalation pattern all suggested an orchestrated campaign rather than genuine rule enforcement. That evening, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to clear my head. As I passed by the community clubhouse, I noticed several board members exiting after what appeared to be an unofficial meeting. Patricia was among them, looking particularly satisfied as she spoke with an older gentleman I hadn't met before. "That's Walter Simmons," came a voice behind me. I turned to find Lisa Cooper, another neighbor who had welcomed me when I moved in. "He's the HOA president, but Patricia's the one who really runs things. Board meetings are just formalities to approve. What she's already decided." "Have they targeted others like this?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Lisa nodded grimly. "The Harrisons before you, the Patels before them. Always the same pattern. Constant violations, surveillance, then the business operation accusation, regardless of whether it's true. Eventually, people get fed up and move. And the rest of the board just goes along with it? Most are afraid of becoming targets themselves," Lisa explained. "Walter owns the largest real estate agency in the county, so he and Patricia have some kind of arrangement. The few who've tried to stand up to them mysteriously found themselves facing their own barrage of violations." I thanked Lisa for the information and continued my walk, the pieces beginning to form a clearer picture in my mind. This wasn't just about rule enforcement or even a power trip. There was something more calculated happening in Oakwood Estates. When I returned home, there was yet another violation notice on my door. "Garbage bin, placed for collection, 14 hours. Above for scheduled pickup. Fine, $65. I took a deep breath and added it to my growing file. Then I opened my laptop and began composing an email to a former colleague who specialized in HOA law. The subject line read, "Consultation request, systematic. HOA harassment and potential legal remedies." As I typed, I glanced out my window to see Patricia driving by slowly, camera visible on her passenger seat. Our eyes met briefly before she accelerated away. The Thursday hearing was 2 days away. I had been planning to approach this diplomatically, to find a reasonable solution that would allow me to live peacefully. But Patricia's escalating tactics made it clear that diplomacy wasn't going to work. It was time to start preparing my case. The Oakwood Estates Community Clubhouse had all the warmth of a courtroom on sentencing day. Rows of folding chairs faced a raised platform where 7 board members sat behind a long table, their expressions ranging from bored to openly hostile. Patricia occupied the seat directly to the right of Walter Simmons, the board president, her posture rigid and a thick binder of evidence positioned in front of her. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in one of my more understated court suits, professional without being intimidating. Several neighbors nodded in silent support as I took a seat in the front row. David gave me a thumbs up from across the room. At precisely 7 p.m., Walter called the meeting to order with a perfunctory bang of his gavel. First item on the agenda, business operation violations at 1742 Oakwood Drive. "Patricia, would you present the evidence?" Patricia stood, smoothing her blazer with practiced precision. "Thank you, Mr. President." She opened her binder and began a presentation that would have impressed even the most meticulous prosecutors I'd faced. Over the past 37 days, the resident at 1742 Oakwood Drive has engaged in ongoing commercial activities in direct violation of our community covenant, she began, clicking a remote to display the first of what would be dozens of photographs on the large screen behind the board. The images showed various cars parked in my driveway, people carrying folders or briefcases approaching my front door, and timestamps of arrivals and departures. She had compiled a detailed log of every visitor to my home, categorizing them as confirmed business associates, based on nothing more than their professional appearance. "As you can see," Patricia continued, "the pattern clearly indicates a high-volume law practice being operated from this residential property. Section 11.2 of our covenant explicitly prohibits commercial enterprises that generate customer traffic. For 23 minutes, she continued her methodical presentation, occasionally glancing in my direction with barely concealed satisfaction. When she finally concluded, Walter turned to me with an expression that suggested the outcome was already determined. "Mr. Chen, do you have anything to say in your defense?" I stood buttoning my suit jacket, a habit from countless court appearances, and approached the podium with calm confidence. "Thank you for the opportunity to address these allegations," I began, my voice measured and professional. "I'd first like to direct the board's attention to Section 23.1 of the Oakwood Estates Covenant. I displayed the relevant page on the screen, having come prepared with my own presentation materials. This section clearly states, and I quote, "Home offices are permitted for residents when such usage does not create excessive noise, traffic, or visible commercial activity." I am not operating a high-volume law practice, as Ms. Winters suggests. I am maintaining a modest home office for occasional work and client meetings when traveling downtown is impractical. I clicked to the next slide, which showed a calendar of the past month with my actual client meetings highlighted, all 7 of them. As you can see, over the 37-day period in question, I hosted exactly 7 client meetings at my home. That's fewer than 2 per week. By no reasonable definition would this constitute excessive traffic. Patricia's face tightened, but before she could interject, I continued. "Furthermore, I'd like to address the selective enforcement issue." I clicked to a new slide showing Patricia's own driveway. This photograph, taken yesterday, shows 3 vehicles parked at Ms. Winters' residence for what I understand is her weekly bridge club. This gathering occurs every Wednesday and brings 5 to 6 visitors to her home. Yet no violations have been issued for this regular excessive traffic. A murmur ran through the audience. Patricia's face flushed red. "That's different," she snapped. "Social gatherings are not commercial activities." "Indeed," I agreed calmly, "and neither are occasional professional meetings within a permitted home office. The covenant makes no distinction between visitors for social purposes and those for professional matters. The only criteria is whether the traffic is excessive, which 7 visitors over 37 days clearly is not." I then presented exhibit after exhibit, the specific language permitting home offices, comparable situations in other HOA communities, and finally, documentation of previous HOA board decisions, allowing other residents to conduct limited business activities from their homes. "In conclusion," I stated after my 15-minute presentation, "I am in full compliance with both the letter and spirit of the covenant. The allegations presented by Ms. Winters represent a fundamental misinterpretation of the rules and potentially constitute selective enforcement, which courts have repeatedly found to be unenforceable." The room fell silent. Several board members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, while others were reviewing the covenant language with newfound interest. Only Walter and Patricia remained unmoved. Walter cleared his throat. "While your presentation was thorough, Mr. Chen, the fact remains that we've received complaints about your business activities." "May I ask from whom?" I inquired innocently. "That's confidential," Patricia interjected. "Actually," I countered, "HOA bylaws require that complaint sources be disclosed to the accused party unless there's a documented safety concern." "I'd like to see the complaint forms, please." This caught them off guard. After a tense silence, Walter reluctantly slid a folder across the table. As I suspected, every complaint form, all 11 of them, was signed by Patricia herself. "I see," I said, allowing the implication to hang in the air. "No other residents have filed complaints." One of the board members, a younger woman I hadn't met, spoke up. "If the covenant allows home offices with limited traffic, and Mr. Chen has demonstrated his client visits are minimal, I'm not sure what violation we're actually discussing." Patricia's response was immediate and sharp. "The issue is the type of business. A law practice brings an undesirable element to our community." The room went completely silent. Even Walter looked uncomfortable with her statement. I raised an eyebrow. "An undesirable element? Would you care to elaborate on what you mean by that, Ms. Winters?" She backpedaled quickly. "I simply meant that legal proceedings can be contentious and disruptive to a peaceful neighborhood. I practice corporate law, Ms. Winters. My clients are primarily businesses negotiating contracts, not individuals engaged in neighborhood disputes." I turned to address the entire board. "Unless there's a specific covenant provision restricting legal services as opposed to other professional services, This appears to be a personal bias rather than a rule violation. After another uncomfortably long silence, Walter banged his gavel. The board will deliberate privately on this matter. Mr. Chen, you'll receive our decision within 48 hours. As the meeting adjourned, several neighbors approached to offer support, clearly impressed by my presentation. Patricia stormed out without speaking to anyone, Walter following close behind. David sidled up beside me. That was masterful, he whispered. But don't celebrate yet. When Patricia gets cornered, she gets dangerous. His warning proved prophetic. The next morning, as I left for a meeting downtown, I found a stack of new violation notices on my windshield. Unauthorized. Modification to landscape irrigation, $150 is fine. Non-compliant window treatments visible from street, $125 fine. Excessive exterior lighting duration, $75 fine. Improper storage of recreational equipment, my bicycle on the patio, $100 fine. The pattern was clear. If Patricia couldn't win on the home office issue, she would bury me in other violations. 2 days later, the board's decision arrived via certified mail. They had ruled that my home office was technically permitted, but issued a conditional warning requiring me to minimize business traffic and maintain residential character of the property. It was a non-decision, crafted to placate both sides without resolving anything. The accumulated fines, now totaling over $1,100, remained in place pending a review process. That evening, as I documented the latest round of violations, I noticed Patricia walking past my house for the third time, photographing something on my property. Our eyes met through the window, and she didn't even pretend to be doing anything else. She wanted me to know I was being watched. I closed my curtains and picked up my phone. It was time to activate my professional network and find out exactly what was happening in Oakwood Estates. This wasn't just about petty rule enforcement anymore. There was something systematic at play, and I was determined to uncover it. The first rule of litigation: know your opponent better than they know themselves. Throughout my legal career, I'd learned that the most effective strategy wasn't just understanding the law, but understanding the motivations driving those who wielded it. Patricia Winters had declared war on me, and now I needed to know why. I began methodically, as I would with any case. My dining room table transformed into a command center: laptop, legal pad, and 3 expanding files containing every piece of correspondence, every violation notice, and every photograph I'd taken since moving in. My first call was to Alex Rivera, a former colleague who specialized in property law. "Chen, you're living the suburban dream and you're calling me at 7 a.m. on a Saturday," he joked when he answered. "The dream has complications," I replied, explaining the situation with Patricia and the HOA. "Sounds like classic harassment, but that's not unusual for overzealous HOAs," Alex said. "What makes you think there's more to it?" Pattern recognition. This isn't random enforcement. It's targeted and escalating. And according to neighbors, I'm not the first victim. Alex's voice turned serious. "Send me everything you have. I'll run some preliminary searches on your HOA's litigation history and any complaints filed with the state." My next call was to Sophia Williams, an investigator I'd worked with on several corporate cases. While technically a private detective, Sophia preferred the term information specialist. She had an uncanny ability to uncover connections that didn't appear on standard background checks. "I need a deep dive on Patricia Winters and Walter Simmons," I explained, "particularly any financial or business relationships between them or involving Oakwood Estates." "The usual package?" she asked, "plus property records for the neighborhood for the past 5 years. I want to know who's buying and selling, and at what prices." With my professional network activated, I turned to a more immediate resource: my neighbors. I started with David, inviting him over for coffee that afternoon. He arrived carrying a folder of his own. "I figured you might be digging," he said, placing the folder on my dining table. "This is every violation notice I've received in 3 years. Nothing compared to what you're getting, but might help establish the pattern." As we talked, David revealed that he'd been keeping a record of which houses Patricia targeted most aggressively. "There's a cycle," he explained. New family moves in. Patricia finds some reason to hate them. Violations pile up. They move out. Property sells below market value. Any pattern to who buys the undervalued properties? I asked. David's expression darkened. Funny you should ask. The Harrison's house, your house, was bought by a company called Oak Valley Investments before being sold to you at a significant markup. The Patel's house across the street went through the same company. And Oak Valley Investments is, no, it's idea. It's an LLC with no public-facing information. I made a note to have Sophia investigate the company. This was beginning to feel less like HOA overreach and more like a systematic scheme. Over the next week, I quietly met with 5 other neighbors who had experienced similar harassment. Each provided valuable pieces to the puzzle. Lisa Cooper showed me violation notices nearly identical to mine. Same infractions, same timing, same escalating fines. The Johnsons, an elderly couple on fixed income, admitted to paying over $3,000 in questionable fines because they feared losing their home. Mark Taylor, who'd served briefly on the HOA board, revealed that financial reports were tightly controlled by Patricia and Walter, with detailed expenditures never fully disclosed to other board members. Each conversation reinforced my growing suspicion. This wasn't just about rule enforcement, it was about property and money. Meanwhile, my security cameras captured Patricia's increasing surveillance. She drove by my house at least twice daily, photographing everything from my mailbox to visitors. Entering my home, on 3 occasions, she ventured onto my property to inspect my backyard fence when she thought I wasn't home. 10 days into my investigation, both Alex and Sophia delivered their preliminary findings. We met at a cafe downtown, away from Oakwood. Faye State's watchful eyes. Your HOA has been sued twice in the past 5 years, Alex reported, sliding a folder across the table. Both cases settled quickly with confidentiality agreements, but here's where it gets interesting. Both plaintiffs moved out shortly after, and the properties, I asked, sold at 15–20% below market value to Oak Valley Investments, Sophia interjected, opening her laptop. Which brings me to my findings. Oak Valley Investments LLC is registered to a Thomas Winters, Patricia's husband, her brother. And guess who handles all Oak Valley's real estate transactions? Walter Simmons Realty. The scheme was beginning to take shape. Patricia identified targets, manufactured violations to drive them out, and then her brother's company swooped in to purchase the devalued properties, with Walter handling the transactions, and likely taking a commission on both the sale and subsequent flip. There's more, Sophia continued. The HOA maintenance contracts, landscaping, pool service, security, all went through companies with family connections to either Patricia or Walter. The irrigation company that maintains common areas is owned by Patricia's son-in-law. They're charging 30% above market rate, so they're squeezing the community from both ends, I concluded, driving property values down to profit on real estate, while siphoning HOA funds through inflated service contracts. Exactly, Alex agreed. Classic self-dealing and breach of fiduciary duty. The board members have a legal obligation to act in the best interest of the HOA, not their personal benefit. I asked the question that had been nagging at me. Is it illegal? Potentially, Alex said. At minimum, it's a breach of fiduciary duty and could constitute fraud, especially if they're misrepresenting HOA finances. The selective enforcement alone is grounds for legal action. As I drove home, I processed what I'd learned. This wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. It was a sophisticated scheme to manipulate property values and enrich a small group at the community's expense. Back at home, I found 3 new violation notices on my door. The latest grievance: unauthorized surveillance equipment on residential property. Patricia had noticed my security cameras. I added the notices to my growing file, then sat down at my computer to plot my next move. I needed more concrete evidence of the financial connections and proof of coordination between Patricia, Walter, and Oak Valley Investments. As I reviewed my notes, my phone chimed with a text from David. Emergency HOA meeting called for next Tuesday. Special assessment vote. $2,500 per household for infrastructure improvements. I texted back, "Who's handling the improvements?" His response came quickly. "New company. Just registered last month. Want to guess who owns it?" The pieces were falling into place faster than I anticipated. A fraudulent special assessment would give me exactly what I needed: direct evidence of financial misconduct that affected every homeowner in Oakwood Estates. I was no longer just defending myself against Patricia's harassment. I was building a case that could bring down her entire operation. That night, as I organized my evidence, I noticed a car lingering outside my house. Through the blinds, I could see Patricia in her Lexus, watching my home. Instead of closing the curtains, I walked to the window and stared directly at her, holding up my phone as if taking her picture. She sped away quickly, but I knew this was far from over. The next move would be hers, and based on the pattern, it would be drastic. The emergency HOA meeting turned out to be exactly the powder keg I anticipated. The community clubhouse was packed with homeowners, many visibly concerned about the proposed $2,500 special assessment. Walter stood at the podium, flanked by Patricia and a thin man in an ill-fitting suit, who was introduced as our infrastructure consultant. "The community's water management system requires immediate upgrades," Walter explained, as a poorly designed PowerPoint displayed vague diagrams of irrigation systems. "If left unaddressed, we risk significant damage to common areas and potentially to individual properties." The consultant nodded gravely beside him. "We've identified critical failure points in the current system. Remediation must begin before the rainy season." I sat quietly in the back, observing the dynamics. Several homeowners asked reasonable questions about bidding processes, timelines, and why this issue wasn't caught during regular maintenance. Walter deflected each question with practiced ease, while Patricia methodically noted who was asking the challenging questions, adding names to her mental target list, no doubt. When the floor opened for comments, I approached the microphone. "I have several questions about Apex Infrastructure Solutions, the company slated to perform this work," I began calmly. Patricia immediately stiffened. Walter's expression remained neutral, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the podium. "According to state records, Apex was incorporated just 5 weeks ago, has no website, no portfolio of previous work, and lists its business address as a UPS store." I paused, letting this sink in. "Before voting to spend over $300,000 of community funds, shouldn't we review their qualifications and compare bids from established companies?" The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. Walter quickly intervened. "We've thoroughly vetted Apex, and their specialized expertise makes them uniquely qualified for our specific needs." "What specific needs would those be?" I pressed. "And who exactly owns Apex Infrastructure Solutions?" Before Walter could respond, Patricia cut in. "This line of questioning is inappropriate and beyond the scope of today's meeting. The board has already approved Apex as a vendor. Without competitive bidding?" I asked. "That would violate Section 7 of the HOA bylaws regarding expenditures over $10,000. The meeting devolved from there, with homeowners demanding answers and the board attempting to regain control. Eventually, Walter tabled the vote until additional information could be provided. A clear retreat. As the meeting disbanded, Patricia cornered me near the exit, her voice low but venomous. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," she hissed. "Back off now or you'll regret it." I maintained my composure. "Threatening a homeowner at an official meeting, Patricia, that seems ill-advised." "It's not a threat," she replied. "It's a promise." 2 days later, I discovered exactly what that promise entailed. I was reviewing case files in my home office when the doorbell rang. A courier stood outside holding a thick legal envelope. "Michael Chen?" he asked. "You've been served." Inside was a lawsuit naming me as defendant. The plaintiff, Patricia Winters. The claim, $100,000 in damages for defamation, harassment, intimidation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The complaint was a masterpiece of distortion. According to Patricia, I had engaged in a systematic campaign of harassment and intimidation since moving in, had defamed her character with false accusations of impropriety, and had deliberately caused severe emotional distress through aggressive confrontational tactics and surveillance. Most absurdly, she claimed I had used my legal background to threaten and intimidate an HOA volunteer simply performing her community duties in good faith. Attached were selective photographs and out-of-context quotes from our interactions, carefully curated to paint me as the aggressor and Patricia as the victim. She had even included statements from witnesses, all board members within her sphere of influence, attesting to my hostile and threatening behavior. The lawsuit was filed by Gregory Winters, attorney at law, another family member, undoubtedly, perhaps another brother or her husband. The interconnections of this family operation were becoming more apparent with each development. I scanned the entire document carefully, taking note of each allegation and the evidence presented. It was simultaneously laughable and concerning, a nuisance lawsuit designed to intimidate, but crafted with just enough plausibility to survive initial scrutiny. Most homeowners faced with such legal action would panic. The prospect of defending against a $100,000 lawsuit, regardless of its merit, would be enough to make many people back down. Add to that the legal costs, stress, and time commitment of fighting such a case, and Patricia's strategy became clear: crush opposition through legal intimidation. Unfortunately for Patricia, she had chosen exactly the wrong opponent. I called. David immediately. Did you know Patricia's brother is an attorney? Gregory? Yeah, he handles all their legal work. Why? She's suing me for $100,000. Defamation, harassment, emotional distress, the works. David was silent for a moment. That's actually not surprising. The Harrisons got hit with something similar right before they moved out. They couldn't afford to fight it, so they settled and left. Did anyone else get sued? The Patels received a demand letter, but they moved before it escalated to a formal lawsuit. I thanked him and ended the call, the pattern now crystal clear. This wasn't just about forcing people out. It was about using legal pressure to expedite the process when targets proved resilient. That evening, as I was documenting the lawsuit in my ever-growing case file, I noticed Patricia parked across the street watching my house again. This time she made no attempt to hide. When she saw me at the window, she actually smiled and waved the way one might greet an opponent across a chessboard. I returned the gesture with a nod of acknowledgement. The battle lines were now formally drawn. Later that night, my phone buzzed. With a text from an unknown number, Winter's lawsuit against Harrison settled for $15,000 plus NDA plus property sale within 60 days. Same attorney. Thought you should know. A concerned neighbor. I saved the message, then pulled up my contacts list. It was time to assemble my response team. 3 hours later, I had scheduled calls with a defamation specialist, a real estate attorney focused on HOA law, and a forensic accountant who specialized in community association fraud. I also contacted Sophia, asking her to expand her investigation to include Gregory Winters and any other family members connected to Oakwood Estates. As I prepared for bed, my email pinged with a message from Walter Simmons. The subject line read, "Opportunity to resolve ongoing issues." The email was brief and to the point. Michael, I've just learned about Patricia's lawsuit. While the board takes no official position on private legal matters between residents, I'd be willing to mediate a resolution that could benefit all parties. Perhaps if you were considering relocating to a community better suited to your needs, we could discuss how the HOA might assist with that transition. I know several excellent properties currently available. Walter. I laughed out loud at the transparency of the offer. They were already positioning to acquire my property at a discount. I drafted a simple response. Walter, thank you for your concern. I have no plans to relocate. I look forward to discussing HOA governance at the next regular board meeting. Michael as. I set my phone down. I felt strangely energized rather than intimidated. Patricia had just made her biggest tactical error. She thought she was suing a stubborn homeowner. She had no idea she was engaging with a litigation attorney who specialized in exposing precisely the type of scheme she was running. The lawsuit wasn't a threat to me. It was an opportunity. The morning after being served with Patricia's lawsuit, I rose early with a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt since my most challenging corporate cases. While many would view a $100,000 lawsuit as a crisis, I recognized it as the strategic opening I needed. Patricia had unwittingly handed me the legal standing to initiate discovery, the most powerful weapon in any attorney's arsenal. I brewed a strong cup of coffee and dialed James Harrington, the managing partner at my firm. "Michael, it's 6:30 in the morning. Someone better be dead or about to be," he grumbled. "I need to take 2 weeks of my accumulated leave, effective immediately," I said, getting straight to the point. "And I might need to borrow Anderson from forensic accounting." After explaining the situation, James was silent for a moment before chuckling. "So the neighborhood tyrant is suing our senior litigation partner for $100,000, not knowing who you are or what you do? That's about the size of it. Take whatever time you need," he said, fully awake now. "And Anderson is yours. This sounds more interesting than the merger he's working on anyway." My dining room transformed into a war room by noon. I called it Operation HOA, a name that made Anderson smile when he arrived with his laptop and 3 banker's boxes of supplies. "So we're going after a neighborhood Karen? This might be the most satisfying case I've worked this year," he said, already setting up his workstation. "Not just after her, after the entire operation," I corrected him. "I believe we're looking at a systematic scheme involving at least 5 family members and potentially millions in fraudulent property transactions and misappropriated HOA funds," Anderson whistled. "And here I thought this was just about getting ridiculous fines dismissed. Those are just the symptoms. We're going after the disease." Our strategy took shape over the next 48 hours. While Patricia clearly expected me to either cave under pressure or file a simple defense to her lawsuit, I was preparing something far more aggressive, a comprehensive counterclaim that would expose the entire operation. The counterclaim would allege breach of fiduciary duty by HOA board members, violation of state HOA regulations regarding financial disclosure, self-dealing in service contracts, fraudulent property manipulation, civil conspiracy, violation of consumer protection statutes. But allegations weren't enough. We needed evidence that would withstand scrutiny. My professional network delivered in spades. Sophia's expanded investigation revealed that over the past 5 years, Oak Valley Investments had purchased 7 properties in Oakwood Estates, all following the same pattern of HOA harassment and below-market sales. In each case, the properties were renovated minimally and flipped for 30–40% profits within months. Alex discovered that Gregory Winters, Patricia's attorney brother, had filed similar lawsuits against 4 former residents, all settled quietly, with confidentiality agreements, and followed by property sales to Oak Valley Investments. Most damning of all, Anderson uncovered a complex web of financial impropriety within the HOA itself. The HOA has paid over $840,000 to 6 different service companies in the past 3 years, he explained, pointing to his meticulously organized spreadsheet. Every single one traces back to either Patricia or Walter's family members. The irrigation company alone has received $215,000 for services that should cost half that amount. "And none of this was disclosed to the community?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Not only was it not disclosed, but it was actively concealed. The financial reports presented to homeowners bundle all service contracts under generic categories like landscape maintenance and infrastructure management. You'd need subpoena power to get the actual vendor payment records, which I'm guessing is why no one has caught it before. "Well," I said with a smile, "fortunately for us, Patricia just handed us exactly that power when she filed her lawsuit. By the end of the week, our response to Patricia's lawsuit was ready, not just a defense, but a comprehensive counterclaim, naming Patricia, Walter, and 3 other Winters family members as defendants. We also prepared to file a separate derivative action on behalf of all Oakwood Estates homeowners against the board for breach of fiduciary duty. Rather than filing immediately, however, I decided on a more strategic approach. First, I needed to understand just how much support I could rally among other homeowners. I arranged a private meeting at David's house, inviting 6 neighbors who had previously complained about Patricia's tactics. I laid out my findings without revealing our full strategy, gauging their reactions. "Let me get this straight," said Lisa Cooper, incredulous. They've been systematically targeting homeowners, driving them out, buying their properties at discounted prices and siphoning HOA funds to family businesses. That's what the evidence suggests, I confirmed. And now that Patricia has sued me, we have the legal grounds to obtain discovery that could prove all of it. What do you need from us? Asked Mark Taylor, the former board member. For now, just documentation. Every violation notice, every HOA communication, every record of interaction with Patricia or Walter, and if you're willing, statements about your experiences. All 6 neighbors agreed immediately, eager to finally see Patricia's regime challenged. By Sunday evening, I had a stack of additional evidence that strengthened our case considerably. Monday morning, instead of filing our counterclaim, I took a different approach. I called Gregory Winters' office directly. Mr. Winters, this is Michael Chen. I believe you're representing your sister in a matter involving me. His voice was instantly guarded. Yes, Mr. Chen. If you're represented by counsel, I should really be speaking with them rather than you directly. I'm representing myself in this matter, I replied calmly. I thought we might discuss a potential resolution before things escalate unnecessarily. My client is seeking $100,000 in damages for clear cases of defamation and harassment. Unless you're prepared to make a serious settlement offer, I don't see much to discuss. Actually, I was hoping to give you a professional courtesy before filing my response and counterclaim tomorrow. Attorney to attorney. There was a pause. You're an attorney? Senior litigation partner at Taylor, Harrington and Chen, I replied. Corporate litigation primarily, though I've handled quite a few complex civil matters as well. The silence. That followed told me everything. Gregory hadn't bothered to research who I was before filing Patricia's lawsuit. He had assumed I was just another intimidated homeowner who would fold under pressure. I see, he finally said, his voice noticeably less confident. And what exactly does this counterclaim allege? Civil conspiracy, racketeering, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. The usual concerns when a family systematically manipulates an HOA for personal profit. We're naming Patricia, Walter, Thomas Winters, yourself, and Oak Valley Investments as co-defendants. The initial demand is $2.7 million, representing the estimated damages to all Oakwood Estates homeowners over the past 5 years. Another longer silence. Those are serious allegations, Mr. Chen. Yes, they are. And they're supported by substantial evidence that will only grow once we begin discovery. The forensic accountant is particularly interested in those service contracts with the family businesses. What exactly are you proposing? Gregory asked, his voice now tight with concern. Withdraw Patricia's lawsuit by close of business today. In return, I'll delay filing the counterclaim for 48 hours to give you time to discuss options with your family members. And if we refuse, then tomorrow morning I file our response, the counterclaim, and a motion for expedited discovery. By Wednesday, you'll be responding to subpoenas for financial records dating back 5 years. By Friday, I'll be deposing Patricia about her selective enforcement practices. The week after that, we'll be reviewing every transaction between the HOA and family-owned businesses. Everything will become public record, available to every homeowner in Oakwood Estates and the local media. The threat hung in the air between us. Gregory knew as well as I did how devastating a public exposure would be, not just financially, but potentially criminally, if the financial improprieties were as significant as we suspected. I'll need to consult with my client, he said finally. Of course, as I said, you have until close of business today. After hanging up, I notified Anderson and Sophia to be prepared for either outcome. If Gregory withdrew the lawsuit, we would proceed, more methodically, building an even stronger case before filing. If not, we would launch our full legal offensive immediately. At 4:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the courts closed, I received an email from Gregory. Mr. Chen, after consultation with my client, we have decided to withdraw the complaint filed against you. The necessary paperwork has been filed with the court. We consider this matter resolved and expect no further action will be necessary. I smiled at the screen. The withdrawal was exactly what I expected. The obvious move when faced with the threat of discovery. But contrary to Gregory's hopes, this wasn't the end of the matter. It was merely the beginning of Patricia's problems. That evening, a black SUV parked outside my house. Walter stepped out, alone for once, and approached my front door. I met him on the porch before he could ring the bell. "Michael," he said with forced cordiality. "I understand there's been a development with Patricia's lawsuit." "It's been withdrawn," I confirmed. "A wise decision." "Yes. Well, family members don't always consult before taking action. I want to assure you that the HOA board had no involvement in Patricia's personal legal matters." "Of course not," I replied, not bothering to hide my skepticism. "Just like the board has no knowledge of the service contracts with Winter's family businesses, or the curious pattern of property acquisitions by Oak Valley Investments." Walter's practiced smile faltered momentarily. "I'm not sure what you're implying, but I came here in good faith to ensure there are no lingering misunderstandings between us." "No misunderstandings at all, Walter. In fact, I've never been clearer about anything in my life." He studied me for a moment, clearly recalculating his approach. "You know, there's an old saying in real estate. Good fences make good neighbors. Perhaps we could discuss building some metaphorical fences that would satisfy everyone's interests." "Are you offering me a bribe, Walter?" He flinched at the directness. "I'm suggesting a mutual accommodation. Patricia withdraws from HOA activities regarding your property, all outstanding fines are cleared, and we all move forward amicably." I leaned against my porch column, making him wait for my response. "And what do you get in this accommodation?" "Peace and privacy for everyone involved." I pretended to consider the offer before shaking my head. "I appreciate the visit, Walter, but I'm afraid the time for private arrangements has passed. The next HOA board meeting is Tuesday, isn't it? I'll be there with several other homeowners who have concerns about the association's financial management." Walter's facade of friendliness evaporated. "You're making a mistake, Chen. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "That's where you're wrong," I replied calmly. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. The question is, do you?" As Walter drove away, I texted Anderson, "Plan B is in motion. Let's get those subpoenas ready." The withdrawn lawsuit had given us valuable information, confirmation that the Winters family feared legal scrutiny and would attempt to make private arrangements to avoid it. But they had underestimated my resolve. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about justice for an entire community. Patricia had spent years weaponizing rules against her neighbors. Now I was about to show her the true power of the law. The Oakwood Estates clubhouse had never been so crowded. Word had spread quickly about the upcoming board meeting, transforming what was typically a sparsely attended formality into standing-room-only event. Homeowners who had never shown interest in HOA proceedings suddenly appeared, curious about the rumors swirling through the neighborhood. I arrived 15 minutes early, accompanied by Anderson and 3 other neighbors who had agreed to speak about their experiences with Patricia. We secured seats in the front row, directly across from the board table where empty nameplates awaited the officials. At precisely 7 p.m., the side door opened and the board members filed in. Walter led the procession. His usual confident stride noticeably stiffened. Patricia followed, her expression a mask of forced composure. 3 other board members trailed behind, looking uncomfortable as they observed the unprecedented attendance. "Quite a turnout," Walter remarked with an artificial chuckle as he took his seat. "I don't believe we've ever had such interest in a standard board meeting." "This isn't a standard meeting," someone called from the back. "We want answers about our money." Walter cleared his throat, tapping the microphone. "Let's maintain order, please. We have a full agenda to cover, and we'll be addressing community concerns at the end of the meeting." "Actually," I interjected, standing, "I believe we should modify the agenda. Given the number of homeowners present specifically to discuss financial concerns, it would be appropriate to prioritize that discussion." Patricia leaned toward her microphone. "The agenda was properly noticed according to bylaws and cannot be modified without Section 4.3 of the bylaws," I interrupted calmly, "provides that any agenda item may be reprioritized by majority vote of members present. I move that we address financial governance immediately." "I second the motion," David E. called out, followed by a chorus of agreement from around the room. Walter's face tightened, but he maintained his composure. Very well. All in favor of modifying the agenda to address financial matters first? Nearly every hand in the room rose. Motion carries, Walter conceded reluctantly. The floor is open for financial discussion. I approached the podium, placing a folder on the surface. Thank you, President Simmons. For those who don't know me, I'm Michael Chen from Sycamore Lane. I'm here tonight representing myself and 17 other homeowners who have signed a petition requesting a full financial audit of the association. Patricia's pen snapped in her hand, ink staining her notepad. We're specifically concerned about 3 areas, I continued. First, the lack of competitive bidding for service contracts. Second, potential conflicts of interest in vendor selection. And third, the overall pattern of selective enforcement that appears to correlate with property acquisitions by Oak Valley Investments, LLC. Walter's practiced smile faltered. That's quite a list of vague allegations, Mr. Chen. Do you have any specific concerns backed by evidence, or is this just neighborhood gossip? I have evidence of all 3 concerns, I replied, opening my folder. Let's start with the service contracts. I projected a slide onto the screen behind the board, a meticulously organized chart showing every major HOA vendor for the past 3 years, their total payments, and their corporate ownership records. Oakwood Irrigation Services has received $215,000 from our HOA in the past 36 months, I explained, highlighting the relevant row. According to state business records, this company is owned by James Winters, Patricia's son-in-law. Elite Security Services, which has received $173,000, is owned by Thomas Winters, Patricia's brother. I continued down the list, methodically, connecting each vendor to Patricia's or Walter's family members. Every major service provider to this HOA is owned by a relative of either Mrs. Winters or Mr. Simmons, I concluded. None of these contracts went through competitive bidding, and none of these relationships were disclosed to the community. The room erupted in angry murmurs. One homeowner shouted, "They've been stealing from us." Walter banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. "These are unfounded accusations. Many of these arrangements predate the current board." The dates of contract approvals are included in the documentation, I countered, pointing to the relevant column. Every contract was initiated or renewed under the current board's authority. "This is absurd," Patricia snapped, finally finding her voice. "These companies provide quality services at fair market rates." "The evidence suggests otherwise," I replied, flipping to the next slide. "I've compiled market rate analyses for each service category. In every case, our HOA is paying 25–40% above average market rates for comparable communities. For 15 minutes, I methodically presented evidence of inflated contracts, undisclosed family relationships, and systematic financial mismanagement. With each new revelation, the audience grew more agitated, and the board members, except for Patricia and Walter, looked increasingly alarmed. "Now let's address selective enforcement," I continued, shifting to a new set of slides. Over the past 3 years, 7 properties in Oakwood Estates experienced intense violation enforcement, resulting in accumulated fines exceeding $5,000 each. All 7 homeowners eventually sold their properties, and all 7 properties were purchased by Oak Valley Investments at 15–20% below market value. I displayed a map of the neighborhood with these properties highlighted. Oak Valley Investments, I explained, is owned by Thomas Winters, the same Thomas Winters who owns Elite Security Services, which contracts with our HOA. Walter stood abruptly. "This presentation is highly inappropriate and potentially defamatory. I'm calling a recess until—" "Sit down, Walter," came a voice from the audience. It was Bill Johnston, one of the community's original homeowners. "We want to hear this. The pattern is clear," I continued. "Certain homeowners are targeted with selective enforcement, accumulated fines create financial pressure, properties are sold at distressed prices to a company owned by Patricia's brother, and then resold at significant profits months later." I turned to face the board directly. "These actions potentially constitute breaches of fiduciary duty, conflicts of interest, and violations of state HOA regulations. As homeowners, we're entitled to a full accounting and immediate corrective action." Patricia suddenly stood, her face flushed with anger. "This is nothing but a personal vendetta. Mr. Chen has been disruptive since the day he moved in. He's been cited for numerous legitimate violations, and now he's retaliating with baseless conspiracy theories." "Are they baseless?" I asked calmly, sliding a document onto the projector. "This is an email from Walter to Oak Valley Investments, dated 2 weeks after I moved in. It reads, 'New target identified on Sycamore Lane. Begin standard procedure. Anticipate acquisition opportunity within 6 months.'" The room fell completely. "Silent?" "Where did you get that?" Walter demanded, his face draining of color. "It was included in discovery materials for a lawsuit that was filed and then hastily withdrawn," I replied, along with numerous other communications detailing the standard procedure for targeting specific homeowners. Patricia's attorney, who had been sitting quietly in the back, now approached the board table, whispering urgently to Walter and Patricia. Whatever he said caused Patricia to shake her head vehemently. "In light of these revelations," I continued, "the petitioning homeowners request 4 immediate actions. 1. All board members with familial connections to HOA vendors must resign immediately. 2. All existing service contracts must be suspended, pending competitive rebidding. 3. A forensic audit must be conducted by an independent firm. And 4. All outstanding violation fines must be suspended pending review by unaffiliated HOA specialists." Walter conferred briefly with the attorney before addressing the room. "These are serious allegations that require proper investigation. I propose we table this discussion until legal counsel can—" "No more delays," Mark Taylor interrupted, standing from his seat. "I move that we vote on these requests immediately." "I second the motion," Lisa Cooper added. Walter looked desperately around the room, realizing he had lost control of the meeting and the narrative. The attorney whispered to him again, and Walter's shoulders slumped in defeat. "All in favor of the actions requested by Mr. Chen?" he asked mechanically. The vote was nearly unanimous. Only Patricia, Walter, and 2 family members in attendance. "Opposed? Motion carries," Walter announced flatly. "The meeting is adjourned." As homeowners began to file out, buzzing with excited conversation about the night's revelations, Patricia remained seated, staring at me with undisguised hatred. When most people had left, she approached me directly. "You have no idea what you've done," she hissed. "This isn't over." I met her gaze evenly. "You're right about one thing, Patricia. It's not over. In fact, it's just beginning. The HOA vote was just the first step. The evidence has also been submitted to the district attorney's office for review." For the first time since I'd met her, Patricia Winters was completely speechless. The conference room at Taylor, Harrington and Chen exuded quiet power, mahogany paneling, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown, and a table long enough to seat 20, all designed to intimidate. Today, however, only 8 chairs were occupied. Myself, Anderson, 2 legal assistants with stenography equipment, Patricia, Gregory, Walter, and a nervous-looking court reporter. Patricia's lawsuit might have been withdrawn, but our counterclaim was proceeding at full speed. After the explosive HOA meeting, we had filed a comprehensive civil action against Patricia, Walter, and 3 other Winters family members, alleging fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and racketeering. The judge had granted our motion for expedited discovery, and today was Patricia's deposition, her first time being questioned under oath about the scheme we had uncovered. The time is 9:02 a.m. This is the deposition of Patricia Winters in the matter of Chen versus Winters, the court reporter announced, beginning the official record. "Mrs. Winters, do you understand that you are under oath and that your testimony today carries the same weight as testimony in court?" Patricia nodded stiffly, her usual confident demeanor replaced by tightly controlled anxiety. She wore a conservative navy suit, clearly attempting to project professionalism, but the effect was undermined by her constantly fidgeting hands. "You need to answer audibly for the record," the reporter reminded her. "Yes, I understand," Patricia snapped. I began with simple background questions, establishing her tenure with the HOA and official responsibilities. Patricia answered mechanically, clearly rehearsed by Gregory, who watched the proceedings with growing concern. Then I shifted focus. Mrs. Winters, please explain the process for selecting vendors for HOA services. Patricia recited the official procedure from the bylaws. Competitive bidding, board review, formal vote. All by the book. And was this process followed when Oakwood Irrigation Services was awarded a 3-year contract in 2022? Of course, she replied immediately. I slid a document across the table. This is the board meeting minutes from March 15, 2022. Could you point to where competitive bids were reviewed for irrigation services? Patricia examined the document, frowning. It may not be in these specific minutes. Because it never happened, I suggested. In fact, no competitive bids were solicited before awarding a $215,000 contract to a company owned by your son-in-law. Isn't that correct? Objection? Argumentative, Gregory interjected. This isn't court, Counselor. You can note your objection. But she still needs to answer. Patricia shifted uncomfortably. James's company was already providing services. It was a renewal. A renewal that required board approval and should have followed bidding procedures, I clarified. Did you disclose to the board or the community that Oakwood Irrigation was owned by your son-in-law? That information was available in public records. That wasn't my question. Did you formally disclose the relationship as required by Section 8.2 of the HOA bylaws regarding conflicts of interest? Patricia glanced at Gregory, who subtly shook his head, warning her not to lie under oath. No, she finally admitted. And did you recuse yourself from voting on this contract? Another uncomfortable pause. No. For the next hour, I methodically walked through each family-connected vendor, establishing the same pattern. No competitive bidding, no formal disclosure of relationships, no recusal from voting. With each admission, Patricia grew visibly more agitated, her rehearsed answers giving way to terse, defensive responses. After a short break, I shifted to the core of our case. Mrs. Winters, are you familiar with Oak Valley Investments, LLC? Her jaw tightened. I'm aware of the company. Are you aware that it's owned by your brother, Thomas Winters? Yes. And are you aware that in the past 5 years, Oak Valley has purchased 7 properties in Oakwood Estates, all following periods of intensive HOA enforcement actions? I don't track my brother's business activities, she replied evasively, placed another document before her. This is an email from your personal account to Thomas Winters, dated January 10, 2023. It reads, New violation campaign working effectively on 1742 Oakwood. Harrison family behind on payments. Expect foreclosure opportunity within 60 days. Can you explain what you meant by violation campaign? Patricia stared at the email, color draining from her face. Where did you get this? Through legal discovery. From your brother's records. Please answer the question. Gregory leaned over to whisper in her ear, but Patricia brushed him off, her composure cracking. This is being taken out of context. I was simply informing Thomas about a property that might become available. Available because you were systematically targeting the owners with HOA violations, I clarified. Here's another email dated March 3, 2023. Harrison foreclosure proceeding as planned. Ensure purchase offer is ready the moment it lists. This was sent 2 weeks after you personally issued the Harrisons their 15th violation notice in 3 months. Patricia's hands trembled slightly. The Harrisons violated multiple community standards. The enforcement was justified. Was it justified for the Patels as well? The Johnsons, the Garcias, all families who received extraordinary numbers of violations before selling to Oak Valley at below-market rates. Objection, compound question, Gregory interjected weakly. Let me be more specific, I amended. Did you coordinate with your brother to target specific homeowners with HOA violations to pressure them into selling their properties? Absolutely not, Patricia insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. Then how do you explain this text message from you to Walter Simmons? Target list updated for Q2. 5 properties identified for acquisition strategy. Walter, who had been silently observing, visibly flinched. Gregory called for another break, practically dragging Patricia from the room for a private consultation. When they returned 15 minutes later, Patricia's demeanor had changed completely. Gone was the defiant HOA tyrant, replaced by a woman who understood she was legally cornered. Before we continue, Gregory began, I'd like to discuss the possibility of settlement negotiations. We can certainly discuss that after completing the deposition, I replied calmly. My client has been answering questions for nearly 3 hours. Perhaps we could... Your client has provided contradictory testimony on key issues and has yet to address the documented pattern of selective enforcement and property targeting, I interrupted. We have court approval for a full-day deposition and I intend to use that time. Gregory looked defeated. Patricia, however, suddenly straightened in her chair. This is ridiculous, she snapped, her voice rising. You moved into my neighborhood and started causing problems from day one. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to maintain community standards, to protect property values? I've dedicated years to Oakwood Estates, while people like you just want to break rules and complain. Mrs. Winters, Gregory tried to intervene. But Patricia was beyond control. Yes, I enforced the rules strictly. Someone had to, and if some people couldn't handle that and decided to sell, that's their problem. If my brother bought their houses, that's just good business. There's nothing illegal about enforcing standards. And the service contracts to family members, I asked calmly, the inflated prices, the undisclosed conflicts of interest, are those just good business too? Everyone does it, she nearly shouted. Every HOA in the county operates this way. You think you're special because you found some technical violations? You have no idea how things really work. Gregory placed a hand on Patricia's arm, desperately trying to stop her self-incriminating rant. But she shook him off. And yes, I targeted you specifically, she continued, pointing a finger at me, because I knew from the moment you moved in that you'd be trouble. People like you think the rules don't apply to them. You think your fancy law degree puts you above community standards. Mrs. Winters, Gregory pleaded, I strongly advise you to stop speaking immediately. She ignored him completely. So what if I told Thomas about properties that might become available? So what if Walter helped with the listings? We were providing a service. Those people didn't deserve to live in Oakwood Estates anyway. The court. Reporter's fingers flew across her machine, capturing every damning word. Anderson beside me was discreetly recording backup audio as permitted by our deposition notice. Walter had his face in his hands. When Patricia finally ran out of steam, the room fell silent. Her outburst had provided exactly what we needed, admissions that would be nearly impossible to walk back. Let's take a 30-minute break, I suggested, gathering my notes. I think we all could use some time to reflect. In the hallway outside, Anderson couldn't contain his amazement. That was the most spectacular deposition meltdown I've ever witnessed. She just admitted to the entire scheme. People, like Patricia, can't help themselves, I replied. They're so convinced of their own righteousness that they view legal boundaries as technicalities that shouldn't apply to them. During the break, Gregory approached me privately, his professional demeanor shattered. We need to talk settlement, he said without preamble. Immediately. I'm listening. My client is clearly emotional today. Some of her statements were hyperbole and shouldn't be taken as factual admissions. The record reflects what it reflects, Counselor. Gregory ran a hand through his hair. What do you want? Financial compensation? We can discuss a reasonable figure. This isn't just about money, I informed him. This is about systematic fraud that has harmed dozens of homeowners and corrupted the entire community governance structure. Then what? Full financial restitution to all affected homeowners. Immediate resignation of all Winters family members from HOA positions. Dissolution of all service contracts with family-affiliated companies. And a binding agreement that no Winters family member may serve in any HOA capacity or enter into any business relationship with Oakwood Estates for a minimum of 20 years. Gregory blinked, clearly taken aback by the comprehensive demands. That's extreme. So was the fraud, I countered. And those are just our civil demands. As you know, the evidence has also been provided to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal charges. The color drained from Gregory's face. Criminal charges. Fraud, conspiracy, misappropriation of funds. The DA seemed particularly interested in the emails documenting the target list and acquisition strategy. When we returned to the deposition room, Patricia sat slumped in her chair, all pretense of confidence gone. Walter had apparently left during the break, unable to witness more self-incrimination. "Mrs. Winters," I began, "before we continue, I want to ensure you understand the seriousness of your testimony today. Are you aware that making false statements under oath constitutes perjury?" Patricia nodded weakly. "Yes? And are you aware that the schemes you've described potentially violate both civil and criminal statutes?" Gregory intervened. "My client will be exercising her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination for the remainder of this deposition." I nodded, having expected this development. "In that case, we'll conclude for today, but be advised that we have depositions scheduled for Thomas Winters tomorrow, Walter Simmons on Thursday, and James Winters on Friday. We also have subpoenas prepared for all financial records of Oak Valley Investments and each of the service companies contracted by the HOA. Patricia finally looked up, meeting my gaze with a mixture of hatred and fear. The realization was dawning that her carefully constructed empire was crumbling, not just her HOA authority, but potentially her family's financial scheme and her personal freedom. As we packed up our materials, Patricia remained seated, staring blankly at the mahogany table. Her carefully constructed world of rules, power, and profit had come crashing down in a single day. "You've destroyed everything," she said quietly, as I prepared to leave. "No, Patricia," I corrected her. "You did that yourself the moment you decided. Rules only applied to others." The week following Patricia's disastrous deposition unfolded like a slow-motion collapse of a house of cards. Thomas Winters invoked his Fifth Amendment rights before I could ask a single substantive question. Walter Simmons mysteriously fell ill and had his deposition postponed, twice. The entire Winters family appeared to be in disarray, their coordinated scheme fracturing under legal pressure. Meanwhile, the Oakwood Estates community was transformed. An interim HOA board had been elected, with David serving as temporary president. Emergency meetings were held to address the financial irregularities and terminate the contracts with Winters-affiliated companies. For the first time in years, homeowners spoke freely at meetings without fear of retribution. It was Friday afternoon when my office phone rang. I recognized Gregory Winters' number immediately. "Mr. Chen, I believe it's time we discussed a comprehensive resolution to this matter," he began, his voice carrying none of its former confidence. "I'm listening. My clients are prepared to make a settlement offer that addresses your primary concerns. Would you be available for a meeting tomorrow morning? We arranged to meet at my firm's offices, neutral ground for them, home territory for me. I spent the evening consulting with Anderson and preparing settlement parameters. Whatever they offered, I needed to ensure it provided justice for the entire community, not just myself." Saturday morning arrived with a surprising development. As I was reviewing documents in the conference room, James, my senior partner, appeared. At the door. "You have visitors," he announced with a slight smirk. "A rather interesting group." Gregory entered first, followed by Walter and, surprisingly, Thomas Winters, Patricia's brother and the owner of Oak Valley Investments. Patricia herself was notably absent. "Thank you for meeting on a weekend," Gregory began after introductions were complete. "We believe this matter has escalated beyond what anyone intended and hope to find an amicable resolution." I nodded, but remained silent, allowing them to make the first substantive move. Walter cleared his throat. "We're prepared to offer a comprehensive settlement. First, Patricia has agreed to resign from the HOA board effective immediately. Second, all fines against your property will be cancelled. Third, we'll ensure you face no further harassment or selective enforcement." I raised an eyebrow. "That addresses my personal situation, but not the systematic issues affecting the entire community." Thomas Winters spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone as his sister's. "Oak Valley Investments is prepared to offer a goodwill payment of $50,000 to the HOA for community improvements. We believe this represents a fair resolution." I couldn't help but laugh, which clearly startled them. $50,000? Your company made over $1.2 million in profits from undervalued property acquisitions in Oakwood Estates. The HOA has paid nearly $840,000 in inflated service contracts to your family businesses. And you think $50,000 resolves this? Gregory shifted, uncomfortably. "What exactly are you seeking, Mr. Chen?" I opened my folder and slid a document across the table. "This is our settlement demand. It's non-negotiable." They huddled together, reviewing the document with increasing alarm. The terms were comprehensive. Immediate resignation of all Winter's family members from HOA positions, already partially accomplished. Dissolution of all service contracts with Winter's affiliated companies, already in progress. Full financial restitution to the HOA for provable excess charges on all service contracts dating back 5 years, approximately $325,000. 4. Compensation to all homeowners who sold properties to Oak Valley Investments, representing the difference between sale price and fair market value plus interest, approximately $720,000. 4. A binding agreement prohibiting any Winters family member from serving in HOA capacities or contracting with Oakwood Estates for 25 years. Full cooperation with any criminal investigation that might arise from these matters. Walter was the first to respond. "This is extortion. You're demanding nearly $1.1 million in payments." "No," I corrected calmly. "I'm demanding restitution of funds that were wrongfully obtained through a systematic fraud scheme. The evidence supports every dollar requested. We could fight this in court," Thomas threatened, though his voice lacked conviction. "You certainly could," I agreed. "And while you're fighting, the criminal investigation will proceed. The DA has already requested copies of Patricia's deposition. Transcript." The mention of criminal charges silenced them. Gregory pulled Walter and Thomas aside for a hushed consultation, their expressions growing increasingly grave. When they returned to the table, Gregory attempted a counteroffer. "Patricia will resign permanently. We'll terminate all family company contracts. We can offer $200,000 total compensation, $100,000 to the HOA, and $100,000 to be distributed among affected homeowners." I shook my head. "The terms are non-negotiable. Full restitution or we proceed to trial, where I'll seek treble damages under the state's racketeering statutes. That would push your liability over $3 million, plus legal fees." More private consultation followed. Thomas appeared to be arguing vehemently against acceptance, while Walter seemed resigned to the inevitable. Gregory finally rejoined me. "My clients need time to consider these terms and arrange for potential payments of this magnitude. We request 72 hours to provide a formal response." I agreed, but added a final condition. The settlement offer expires in 72 hours. After that, not only do we proceed to trial, but I personally ensure that every local news outlet receives copies of Patricia's deposition transcript. As they prepared to leave, Walter lingered behind. Once Thomas and Gregory had exited, he spoke. Quietly. "You don't understand what you're doing, Chen. Patricia isn't just angry, she's desperate. And desperate people make dangerous decisions. Is that a threat, Walter?" "It's a warning. From someone who's watched Patricia operate for years. She won't accept defeat, especially not public humiliation. Then she should have thought of that before targeting innocent homeowners and orchestrating a fraud scheme." Walter shook his head. "Just watch your back." That evening, as I was reviewing case files at home, a notification from my security system alerted me to movement on my front porch. Through the camera feed, I watched as Patricia herself approached my door, alone in the darkness. She rang the doorbell, then paced nervously while waiting. I considered not answering, but curiosity won out. I activated the porch light and opened the door, keeping the security chain engaged. "Patricia," I acknowledged coolly. "It's nearly 10 p.m. Her appearance was shocking. Gone was the perfectly coiffed HOA tyrant, replaced by a disheveled woman, with smudged makeup and wild eyes. "We need to talk," she insisted, her voice unsteady. "Without lawyers, without witnesses, just you and me." "I don't think that's wise." "Please," she said, the words sounding foreign coming from her. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." Against my better judgment, I closed the door, removed the chain, and reopened it. 5 minutes. We can talk on the porch." Patricia stepped onto the porch but remained standing, too agitated to sit. "They're going to accept your terms," she began abruptly. "Thomas and Walter, they're arranging for payments already." "That's a prudent decision. For them, maybe, but it destroys me completely. Do you understand that? Everything I've built, my reputation, my authority, my legacy in this community, gone. Your legacy is one of intimidation and fraud, Patricia. Her face contorted with a mixture of rage and desperation. I made this neighborhood what it is. Before me, people parked boats in their driveways and painted their houses whatever gaudy colors they wanted. I created standards. I created value. You created a scheme to enrich your family at your neighbor's expense. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I can make you a better offer, privately, just between us. Double whatever they're paying you to drop this whole thing. Triple it. Name your price. There is no price, Patricia. This isn't about money. Then what? What do you want? She demanded. Justice, accountability, for you to face consequences for your actions. Patricia's expression hardened. You have no idea what I'm capable of when cornered. Actually, I think I do, and that's precisely why this settlement includes prohibitions against you holding any HOA position in the future. She laughed bitterly. You think some paper agreement can stop me? This is my community. I'll find ways to regain control, with or without an official title. Not if you're serving time for fraud. The color drained from her face. They wouldn't really press charges, it's just HOA politics. The DA thinks differently, especially after reviewing those emails about target lists and acquisition strategies. Patricia fell silent, the full weight of her situation seemingly hitting her for the first time. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, smaller, almost pleading. What if I cooperated, testified against Thomas and Walter? They were the ones who developed the property scheme. I just helped identify opportunities. The desperation in her offer was palpable. She was willing to sacrifice her own family members to save herself. It confirmed everything I had suspected about her character. The settlement offer stands as written, Patricia. If you want leniency from the DA, that's between you and them. She stared at me for a long moment, something dangerous flickering in her eyes. You'll regret this, Chen. One way or another, you'll regret this. As she turned to leave, I called after her. Your 5 minutes are up, Patricia, and so is your time controlling this neighborhood. I watched her walk away, shoulders hunched in defeat, before closing and locking my door. The settlement offer was on the table, but something told me this confrontation was far from over. Patricia Winters wasn't accustomed to losing and cornered. Predators were always most dangerous just before the end. Morning light streamed through the blinds of courtroom 306 as I reviewed my notes one final time. The settlement deadline had come and gone with no response from the Winters family. Instead, Gregory had filed a series of desperate motions to dismiss, to compel arbitration, to disqualify me as counsel, all denied by the court. Now, 3 weeks after Patricia's late-night visit to my porch, we were headed for a preliminary hearing that would determine whether the case proceeded to full trial. The courtroom doors swung open, and Gregory entered alone, his expression grim. No Patricia. No Walter, no Thomas. Counsel, he acknowledged stiffly, taking his position at the defense table. Your clients couldn't make it, I inquired casually. They'll be here, he muttered, though his tone suggested otherwise. At precisely 9 a.m., Judge Eleanor Martinez entered the courtroom. Known for her no-nonsense approach and meticulous attention to evidence, she was precisely the judge I had hoped would be assigned to our case. Good morning, she began, reviewing the docket. Chen versus Winters, et al. This is scheduled as a preliminary hearing on plaintiff's motion for summary judgment. Are all parties present? Michael Chen for the plaintiff, Your Honor, I responded, rising. Gregory Winters for the defendants, Gregory stated. I must inform the court that my clients are delayed. Judge Martinez frowned. This hearing was scheduled 2 weeks ago, Counselor. Their presence was required. I understand, Your Honor. However, the courtroom doors burst open, and all heads turned as Patricia strode in, followed by Walter. Both looked disheveled and tense, nothing like the polished neighborhood autocrats they'd once been. Thomas was notably absent. My apologies for the interruption, Your Honor, Patricia announced, her voice carrying none of its former authority. May I address the court directly? Judge Martinez studied her with obvious disapproval. Are you represented by counsel, Ms. Winters? I am, Your Honor, but I have a statement I wish to make personally. Gregory looked alarmed, clearly unaware. Of what Patricia intended. The judge nodded cautiously. You may proceed, but be advised that anything you say becomes part of the court record. Patricia approached the podium, hands visibly trembling. Your Honor, I wish to change our position in this matter. We accept all terms of the settlement agreement previously offered by Mr. Chen. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Gregory appeared stunned. Ms. Winters, Judge Martinez began carefully, are you stating that you agree to the payment of approximately $1.1 million in restitution, as well as all other terms outlined in the plaintiff's settlement demand? Yes, Your Honor, and do all. Defendants join in this acceptance. Walter nodded from his seat. We do, Your Honor. Judge Martinez turned to me. Mr. Chen, is the settlement offer still available to the defendants? I considered for a moment. It is, Your Honor, with one additional condition. Full implementation must occur within 30 days, including all financial transfers. Agreed, Patricia said quickly, before Gregory could intervene. Very well, the judge concluded. The court will retain jurisdiction to enforce the settlement. Terms. I expect a formal agreement filed by the end of business. Tomorrow. As the judge adjourned the hearing, Gregory cornered his clients in heated discussion. I gathered my materials, satisfied with the outcome, but curious about Patricia's sudden capitulation. The answer came as I exited the courtroom. A court officer approached with a message. Patricia wished to speak with me privately in the consultation room. Against my better judgment, I agreed. She sat alone at the small table, looking smaller somehow, diminished without her clipboard and authority. Why the sudden change of heart? I asked, remaining standing. Thomas was arrested last night, she said flatly. Securities fraud, completely unrelated to Oakwood Estates. But when the investigators seized his records, they found everything about our neighborhood operation. And self-preservation kicked in, I surmised. She looked up, eyes hollow. Call it what you want. The DA offered me a deal, full cooperation, in exchange for consideration in sentencing. I'm facing charges regardless, but this way I might avoid significant prison time. And Walter? Cutting a similar deal. We're all going down, Michael. Are you satisfied? I took the seat across from her. This was never about satisfaction, Patricia. It was about justice for an entire community that you terrorized for years. I still don't understand why you fought so hard, she said, genuinely perplexed. Most people would have just moved away. Because bullies win when good people leave, I replied simply. And I'm tired of watching bullies win. She nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding crossing her face before the mask of resentment returned. Well, congratulations. You've won. Oakwood Estates is yours now. I stood to leave. It was never mine to take, Patricia. It belongs to all the residents equally. The following week saw remarkable transformations in Oakwood Estates. The settlement agreement was executed promptly, with funds flowing to both the HOA accounts and individual homeowners who had been forced to sell under Patricia's regime. Some used the unexpected windfall to move back to the neighborhood they had once loved. The interim HOA board, led by David, implemented a comprehensive reform of governance structures, term limits for board members, transparent financial reporting, a requirement for competitive bidding on all contracts over $5,000, and a formal ethics code prohibiting conflicts of interest. Patricia, Walter, and Thomas all eventually pleaded guilty to various charges, receiving a combination of probation, community service, and in Thomas's case, a 16-month prison sentence. The plea deals required them to relinquish all property in Oakwood Estates and barred them from HOA involvement anywhere in the state. 6 months after that first courtroom hearing, I received an unexpected envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a formal invitation to join the Oakwood Estates HOA board, along with a handwritten note from David. We need people who understand both the law and ethics. 3-year term, no dynasties allowed. Monthly meetings with wine afterward. The neighborhood voted unanimously. Please say yes. I smiled, considering the irony. I had moved to Oakwood Estates seeking peace after years of corporate battles only to find myself in the most intense legal fight of my career. Now they wanted me to help lead the very organization I had fought against. That evening, as I sat on my porch enjoying the tranquil neighborhood I had helped reclaim, I noticed a moving truck pulling away from Patricia's former house. The new owners, a young couple with 2 small children, were arranging furniture on their front porch, laughing together as they built their new home. I made my decision, took out my phone, and texted David, "I accept on one condition. The wine better be good." His response came immediately. "Already upgraded from the box wine Patricia used to serve at board meetings. Welcome aboard, counselor." The next day, I drove past the neighborhood entrance where a new sign had recently been installed. Below, "Welcome to Oakwood Estates." Smaller letters read, "A community governed with fairness and transparency." Patricia's reign was truly over. In its place was something far more valuable than perfectly manicured lawns and uniform mailbox heights, a genuine community where rules existed to serve the residents, not control them. As I parked in my driveway, no violation notices waiting for me, I realized that sometimes justice requires not just knowing the law, but having the determination to use it properly. Patricia had weaponized rules against her. Neighbors, we had used the law to restore balance and fairness. In the end, that made all the difference.